call. And then on each issue, I will ask if there's anybody who I'll just go down the chain and see if anyone wants to speak. But before we start that, I want to let you know that on the public hearing for Penelope Lane and on the appointment with Steve Giosha, I will chair the meeting, but I will not make any comments or vote on anything. I will be recusing myself from those two, but because of the circumstances, I will just chair the meeting, and that way we can continue with the way we're going. Roll call, Margaret Sweet.
Here.
John Souza,
Present.
Steve Taylor,
I'm here.
and Kevin Mello.
Present.
Okay, so we have a full quorum. Everyone is present. The first thing on the agenda is the definitive subdivision plan entitled Penelope Lane.
Laurie, just some
The
logistics first. Can you hear me? Laurie,
Yes,
some logistics.
yes, who is it?
Yeah, John Souza. You're the only one I see on
Go
the
ahead.
screen. The last time we met, I could see all 5 members. Am I doing something wrong here?
Up the top hand right corner, there's a speaker view or gallery view. If you switch over to gallery view, it'll.
Let's see, switch to, okay, now I can see everybody. Great. Much better. Thank you.
We have the engineer, Jamie. I know I'm not going to say your last name right, Bazinet, I think.
Bissonette, yep.
Bissonette. He's from Zenith Engineering, and he is going to present the Penelope Lane subdivision. So we're going to start by opening the public hearing with regard to this one. And then ultimately, after the presentation, we will be continuing it until the first meeting in May. The reason we're waiting till the May meeting is because we're going to do some things with regard to the town meeting in the interim. So that's when we will continue the public hearing at that time.
Okay, so I need a motion to open the public hearing for a definitive subdivision plan entitled Penelope Lane. Margaret?
I make that motion.
Second.
So Margaret made the motion and John seconded it. All in favor, Margaret?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Stephen?
Aye.
Kevin?
Yes.
And Lori is a yes. The motion carries unanimously. Okay, so now to the engineer.
Good evening, Jamie Bissonette from Zenith Consulting Engineers for the record. Also tonight we have Robert Forbes from my office. Robert helped me with the subdivision layout and drainage. So if we have any specific questions that I can answer, he could possibly give us some answers on that end. Christine, I'm not sure, do you have the ability to put the plans up on the screen?
I am set up from my personal laptop, not from my work laptop. So
Got it.
thought that you were given the presentation tonight. I'm sorry. So I did
Nope.
not. I did not.
Well, I can put them up. I need to be, I think we have to have the ability for me to take control.
You
Peter?
should be all set. If you
Okay,
look
perfect.
down the bottom,
So-
just share your screen.
So where would I go to put those on the screen? Just share screen?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Let me pull that up.
So this is Peter Chase from DCTV that's kind of guiding us through the process here.
Excellent, thank you, Peter. All right, so share screen. We are going to, here we go. Share. All right, so as you can see, we've, and this is my first time doing a planning board presentation. I did have a zoning board, so please struggle with me as we get through this. We're proposing an OSRD development off of Chase Road, and we're calling it entitled Penelope Lane. Penelope Lane, or the parcel right now consists of a few different parcels that combine to be about 90 acres. They back up to the Passamansket River. There's a sewer easement that runs down through the property, and our understanding is actually goes underneath the Passamansket River to the other side, and has some kind of a lift station over on the other side, which I believe is easterly of the river. On this sheet, you can roughly see the overall layout. You can see Chase Road, which is in this vicinity here. You have UMass Dartmouth to the west, and then you have Brayton Way, which is, I believe, a small private right-of-way in this vicinity. And then you have our existing access here, which we're looking to improve and create a private way for the development of this 4-lot OSRD. What will happen is we're expecting somewhere in the range of 79 acres to be left for open space. And we're obviously going with the regulations. We'd like to talk with Mike O'Reilly and, in the town and see if it's something that they'd like to hold the CR on. If not, we will go down the avenues in accordance with the regulation. So the wetland lines and resource areas have been approved through the town. Mike O'Reilly and Mark Garrett reviewed the resource areas. They did issue a determination. So the resource areas are locked in. And so what we have here is, this being our lotting sheet, you can see we have lot 1, 2, 3, and 4. The smallest being roughly 0.9 acres. And the subsequent lots getting all the way up to about 4 3/4 acres. And then we have parcel B being for a small drainage facility, and parcel A is for the roadway right-of-way itself. I'm going to skip this. This isn't, because the site is so large, what we're doing is we're showing on this sheet just roughly where our focus is. And that's where we did the detailed topographic survey focused of wetland, upland line, etc. Outside of this area, we really didn't spend a lot of time with topographic survey or existing conditions. So I'm going to skip down to the next page, which gets us into a little bit more detail. So as you can see from Chase Road coming down onto our site, there's a gentle slope. The plan doesn't necessarily do it justice. I was able to actually drive down this in my truck quite easily. Right now it's running at roughly a 6%. And then once you get down to this area here, down past the lots that have frontage on Chase, there's a little bit of a thick, brushy area, and then you open up into nice fields. For the most part. And then there's tree, beyond that, there's tree lines that bring you back to the Pass and Manskett. What's happening presently is the water from Chase Road is coming down via culverts or just overland flow coming down to our site and impacting our site quite a bit. So when we looked at drainage, that was a big part of the things that we had to look at for drainage, was how we were going to handle that water and comply with stormwater management. So on this next sheet, you'll see what we did was we were able to run a swale on the westerly side of the property. That picks up the water that's coming down from Chase Road. And in one case in particular, there's a couple of culverts that just discharge from the storm drains in Chase Road and head straight down to our site on a property line. What we've done is we've designed it to handle in the 100-year storm, picking up those watersheds, and we're flowing it down along the side of parcel A to a micro pool, a little area with 2 24-inch pipes that then bring it to a level spreader and a swale to bypass the detention, because it doesn't have to be treated on our site. It's already been handled. What we're doing is we're taking our roadway drainage, all of the pavement in parcel A, and we're treating it and putting it into a drainage basin with micro pools and a forebay, and then discharging it, holding it back, so that overall in the storm events with the stormwater report we've included show a decrease in rate in all three events. This site already has sewer that runs down it with the sewer easement. Coming down the road, it runs gravity. So we would be able to tie into either the line or one of the manholes. Presently, we're proposing tying it into a manhole. And what we would do on our site is we'd propose putting in E1 pumps, pumping over to a manhole, and then going gravity into the existing sewer manhole. And we'd also be looking to tie into water that is up on Chase Road, bringing the water down along with the fire hydrant at the end of the road. Does anyone have any questions for me up to this point?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
How many lots total are being created that don't exist now with anything, are going to be built on that don't have anything built on them now?
4.
Just 4.
Just 4. Yep.
And so that's what you're draining, all the rest, and is the rest of it going into conservation? Is it unbuildable? What's its story?
Yeah, so we have a mix of floodplain, wetland resource area in the back. There is more upland area, but the client wants to develop 4 lots. This was the configuration that we went with. And he's quite pleased with the layout and what we're able to obtain here. So 4 lots is what we were asked to achieve, and that's what we have.
So again, as we stated at the beginning of this, there will not be any decision made tonight. I can tell you that at the beginning of March, I had sent this to all of the technical reviewers in town, which are the department heads, like the building official, Conservation Commission, Mike O'Reilly there, Board of Health, etc. We had a meeting scheduled with the engineer for March 25th. Obviously, all of that changed with the closing of town hall and all of these items. So I have extended the deadline for everybody to get me comments. So I know that there are numerous comments coming in from many of these departments, such as DPW and whatever. So that's why we're asking to wait a couple more weeks before anything goes any further with regard to this. The reason I decided to go forward with it tonight is because when it came in, we had initially advertised it and posted notice. So the notice date was for tonight's meeting. So this has not been reviewed by any technical reviewers of yet.
Yeah,
Jamie,
Yes.
Kevin Mello. I don't see any sidewalks on your
Yes,
plan.
so, yeah, Kevin, so you're right. What we did was we submitted a list of waivers along with the application. What we're looking to do is for this to be a private road, so never to be accepted by the town. This would be held in private ownership and under what would be a homeowner's maintenance agreement or a condominium association. But yes, we're asking for waivers of the sidewalk, and we're also asking for a waiver, I believe, at the entry to minimize the pitch of the road. We looked at the entry leveling area and found that what it did was it brought us too far back onto our slope, so that we were creating about a 5-foot build, 6-foot build of a road with retaining walls going all the way down. What we were able to do here is, knowing that there's 4 houses and understanding that a private roadway can be something that the board can grant waivers on, we kept the width to the requirement. We have the stormwater to the requirements, but we're asking for a few waivers, one of them being sidewalk, to get this project to financially work and to function properly. That being said, too, there are no sidewalks up on Chase Road.
So I did have a list of waivers. There are 8 waivers being requested. I thought that was part of your packages. I don't know if it is or not, but I will resend it prior to the next time that they come before us. The waivers had to do with section 3.303, which is gradients, 3.305, which is shoulders, 3.306, which is pedestrian circulation, 3.307, which is street trees, 3.310, which is drainage, 3.10D, and then 3.10E, which is drainage, 3.10G, which is drainage. And the last waiver request is for
I do see it. Streetlights.
streetlights. Right.
Yes,
So
okay.
I will just make sure that you have all of that again.
I think we all got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it was right. It was right online.
Okay.
I have a question. Madam Chair, may I talk?
Yes, go ahead.
I think that you have quite a few waivers that you're requesting on this.
Yes, we're asking, I believe it was for 8 waivers.
Right,
That-
that's quite
that's-
a bit. I mean, pedestrian circulation, street trees, the drainage, of course, we're gonna wait for DPW. the shoulders, from 4 feet to 1 foot?
Yeah, so with the shoulders in this aspect, what they're looking for is us to go out on a level plane 4 feet and then start catching back with grade. What that does in this case, when you're looking at the plan, is actually starts to shed water into the neighboring properties without the use of retaining walls. In a case like this where we're trying to match grade the best that we can, the shoulder itself we feel is something that's not as important as getting the grading and drainage to work appropriately.
Well, I know that site very well, okay,
Mhm.
because I drive by it all the time.
Sure.
And that's really slope there, isn't it? It seems to me from driving on the Chase Road that it's a real slope that goes down.
It's about a 6%, which is still within your street acceptance regulations. In fact, you guys allow streets steeper than that, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Jamie, John Souza, just some comments and questions. The open space parcel,
Yes.
I saw an acreage, I don't have it in front of me, but I didn't see what the uplands were. Do you have the uplands calculation for the,
On the conservation parcel?
yes,
No, we didn't explore all of the wetland upland on the, it's just under 80 acres. We did not have all of that delineated. We delineated in the area that was closer to the development area.
so I haven't seen this site, and I know, just looking at your abutters here, that one of the things the planning board looks for in these OSRDs is, what kind of open space are we getting, and
Sure.
is it usable open space?
Mhm.
And that we're not getting the junk land, all the wetlands, the entire parcel. And I can't verify that here, so
Sure.
I'd like to have some kind of estimate on what are we getting here,
Okay.
because that's going to weigh in on my decision whether I want to go OSRD or not.
Okay.
If the open space parcel is, if all you're doing is giving us the wetlands, then that's no value to the town in my eyes,
Sure.
as one planning board member. And one of the things that is in our regulations, I don't know if you noticed, is in the open space parcel, we look for public access and future trail networks. And I look at this site and I see DNRT owns a parcel to the north of you, that's a direct abutter, and the town of Dartmouth owns a parcel to the south of you, down in the
Yes.
corner, that's a direct. And it seems ideal, and where it's along the Pascamansit, to make sure we have public access to the open space. So on that note, one of the questions in your review with the DPW is that you're utilizing the sewer easement and you're building a road along that sewer easement. How wide is the sewer easement?
I believe it's 20 feet.
20 feet, and your right of way there is 40 or 50 feet?
I believe it averages about 50 feet.
Yeah. So you come down with Penelope Lane, that proposed, and then you take a sharp left to the north, and the drainage easement, the sewer easement continues. Will the DPW allow a public access easement over the sewer easement, or do we have to account for 10 feet outside the sewer easement to get that public access along there? Just a question for them.
Sure.
I don't think there's going to be an issue, but I want to make sure that it's all clear that if the planning board does ask for public access, it would be down that sewer easement that
Yep.
people can walk to gain access to the back there. So I'd be very interested in those answers at our next meeting. And your waivers, the only one I got a real issue is I don't see the need for street trees to be waived.
Okay.
The width and the 4-foot shoulder waiver, I'm okay with that as long as we get a sign off from DPW and the fire chief.
Okay.
Those shoulders, are asked for DPW for plowing purposes and mainly from the fire chief, that they can pull off to the side of the road safely. And if they're fine with it, I may be fine with it, but I definitely want to base my decision on their input, the DPW and the fire chief on the shoulder waiver. So
Okay.
keep that in mind. Get that information from those folks.
So again, the reviewers are going to provide us comments. So I will ask that. We try to keep the process going through one channel right now. So I will reach out to both of those departments with regard to those specific questions. Again, we are waiting. Jamie is waiting on the comments from all of the reviewers. We haven't had time. People's priorities are somewhat different right now.
Can
And
I ask a question too?
I got one more question, Steve. Just
Okay, go ahead.
The pond to the north, Jamie.
Yes,
It looks like you've left it in the open space parcel. Is
that's
that
correct.
a live pond? I mean, is that dead? Is it? Do you know? Is there wildlife? There's fish there. What's the state of the pond? Do you know?
I don't know
You don't?
what the state of the pond is. That's something that we can explore.
Is it
and
a
try to get
man-made
answers.
pond or is that a natural pond?
Again, I'm not aware of that either.
So a lot of this area, and I don't know, I'm not familiar with this specific site, but a lot of these areas were gravel. Was this 80 acres ever gravelled at any point in its past?
Not that I'm
Was it-
aware of. It is
So it's all natural.
Everything that I've seen has been field
Yep.
out there.
Even the open space, that 80 acres out back, you think was never gravelled?
I'm not aware that it was gravelled. If it
Right.
was,
Yeah, okay. That's all my comments and questions at this point. Thank you.
thanks.
Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know if I should ask it or if I can ask Christine to ask it, but given the number of waivers that you're asking and some of the points that John made about whether we should agree to OSRD or some regular way and which is better in this circumstance, I can see some promise, as John pointed out, as to why we might want to do this, even though, as you probably all know, I'm pretty skeptical on subdivision in the first place. But I would be interested to know if, I know your client didn't want to pay you to do a lot of research on the 80 to 90 additional acres, but could you ask your client to bring back to us a question that if we do approve this, would he or she be willing to put the remainder of it in permanent conservation so that we know that further development won't come back as a future question?
Oh no, they're definitely willing to do that.
Well, thank you. That's what I was looking for. That's important to me, and I'd like to hear all of that come back with the answers to the other questions that Christine is asking.
Okay.
Thanks.
Jamie, I'd like to see you talk to DNRT. I have done the DNRT walk that's just north. So
Okay.
I couldn't see from such small prints that it abuts that piece of property.
It
But
does,
that
yes,
piece
yeah.
of property, it has a bridge. It's called the Old Kings Highway, and it actually connects Chase Road to Tucker Road. So
Mm.
you're able to park right near the cemetery and walk all the way over to Tucker Road. So I would be interested in seeing if DNRT would be interested, because there is some, there would be future paths that DNRT could use on that 79 acres. So
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Christine, is that something that I can do before the town says yes or no, based on the way that the regulations were changed?
Again, I'm waiting on comments. I guess you can reach out to DNRT. I mean, the comments that are coming in so far are going to confuse the whole issue. I'm going to be very
Sure.
honest with all of you. So, I mean, I can't stop you from reaching out to a private agency or a nonprofit in this particular case. But
But
it's
does Mike,
something that we can head off at the pass. If you know you're going to change some things as a result of the comments you received tonight, then by all means you should get some of that information to us if that will assist your project going forward.
sure, and does conservation, they get first shot at wanting the conservation restriction, from my understanding,
So
based on the new regs?
the town is going to make the decision.
Okay,
Again, I
Understood.
have received some comment, but because we were only prepared for the presentation for this evening, and because I haven't received comment from all department heads, I'd rather not bring this conversation any further at this point.
Okay, understood.
So I would imagine I've given them another week or two to respond and get me comments with regard to this. Again, some of them have started to trickle in. So you'll have them at least a week in advance of the next meeting. And I request that the planning board continue this matter, keep this public hearing open and continue the matter to the May 11th meeting. And hopefully by then we'll be able to have an actual public meeting, you know, at Town Hall.
I'll move that we continue if others agree.
I'll second that.
Kevin, Steve Taylor, motion to continue the public hearing to May 11th. Kevin Mello seconded. All in favor, Margaret,
I agree.
John,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes?
Kevin,
Yes.
and Lori, yes. Christine, I do have one comment now that this is put off. The motion's been carried. Could you forward to the applicant the email that we received today from the Board of Health?
Yeah, okay. So Jamie, I will give you the comments I've received so far,
Excellent.
which include Board of Health and the environmental officer, Mike O'Reilly.
Sure. I
Okay.
appreciate that. And
Okay.
will those be emailed?
I can email those to you, yes. Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you.
we're gonna try to keep it all electronic if we can, so.
I get it. No, thank you very much.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, I see Kathy raised her hand. I don't know exactly what that means, but there's somebody, Kathy's
I'm sorry.
iPad.
Who is Kathy? Peter, can you see that?
I can see it says Kathy's iPad. Kathy, can you hear me?
She's muted, whoever it is
Yeah,
muted.
she's not, I'm not sure if she's just somebody from the general public, and those are the people we're trying to just have type in the chat window. I can unlock them if you want.
Yeah, maybe in this particular case.
All right, they should be able to unmute themselves and talk.
Kathy, can you hear us to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, so please identify yourself for the record.
Okay, good evening. My name's Kathleen Brito. I'm an abutter to this, I'm way at the south end of this, the south end of the property in question.
Mhm.
I have owned my piece of property for 40 years. I've lived on Chase Road all my life. I can only attest to you're questioning the quality of the land in the back there. I can only tell you that it's sopping wet most of the time. I go up to the DNRT, their path that's further up on Chase Road, and you can walk in there. But the further south you go, the wetter the land becomes. I would say out of my 10 acres, maybe the front 4 to 4.5 are dry, and then after that, it gets very wet within the trees and everything. You know, I know that this project is far away from me, but you know, my concern is the runoff water and you know what it would create. Not that that backland of mine is usable in any way, but I think like if some of you from town went and took a walk through that, you might see what it's like. My sons have always been hunters and a lot of the land is not passable. My question is, when you asked about gravel, what do you mean by gravel? Was gravel placed there?
No, as you know, Kathy, there were many parcels on Chase Road that were gravel pits.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if this was one of them.
No, I do know that in the woods back there, there was a place where we were told years ago that the electric company like dumped some stuff and you'd come into the woods. And it was kind of like a gravelly area. I don't know if that was like part of a gravel pit at one time. That's further up closer to the north end of, you know, the property. But off that access road where the sewer goes through. Because we used to walk through there as kids. I haven't been back there in probably 50 years. But it is the pond they may be talking about in that pasture land that always collected there on its own. Sometimes it actually, if it's dry enough, it disappears. Down in the, it's kind of like to the right-hand corner of that open parcel of land. If they're talking about where they always used to let horses and animals graze and stuff.
So again, Kathy, we are going to keep this public hearing open, and we're going to continue it to the May 11th meeting. Hopefully that meeting will be on site at Town Hall. If for some reason it's not, we will again have the agenda with another call-in ID. So by all means, please join us, or if you want to stay on
Yeah.
to listen to the rest of it, I
No.
think it's fabulous. We're glad that you did.
Like I said, you know, there's other neighbors that are closer abutters, and water, I'll give you an example. I lived on Chase Road on the other side of my parents' home before UMass was ever built, and there was never a water problem. And then UMass was built, which was kind of like wetlands, and then everyone on that side of the road started getting water in their basements. And I remember in, you know, the spring after UMass was built, animals running out of the woods because they were drowning, because there's a lot of water in this area. So, I mean, I don't understand any of the dynamics of, you know, the structures and the drainage and all that. But, you know, my biggest concern would be the water situation in this area, you know, the runoff water and how it might impact maybe, you know, homes closer in that area, their property, and even further down the road because water travels. So that's all.
Yep, that's good. We'll be, we do have DPW looking at it, and they do bring in a drainage consultant on occasion to work with us as well. So the drainage issues will be looked at in great detail.
Christine, may I ask one more question, please?
Okay, I'm not really here at the meeting, but sure.
Based on, I'm sorry, I should have asked Lori, but I just simply, based on one of the comments that Kathy made, which we know nothing about, or at least I know nothing about, could you make sure that in the weeks in between the now and the next meeting, whoever's responsible in the town should triple check whatever some electric company may or may not have dumped there and find out exactly what it is? Because if it had anything to do with certain components and transformers, we could have another Bliss corner on our hands. We don't want that. So we should triple check what was or wasn't dumped there so we know for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Anything else on this issue?
Nope, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you in about a month.
Okay,
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, bye-bye.
Take care.
bye. Okay, number 2 on the agenda,
It's the OSRD subdivision for Windsong Acres,
and we need a motion to continue this to,
April 27th meeting.
So moved.
Second,
need a second. Okay, Kevin, did you move it?
John Souza moved it.
Who moved it?
John
John
Souza,
Souza moved it, and
Steve seconded it.
Steve
yes,
And
Steve
Steve
seconded it.
Steve Taylor seconded it. I need a motion, roll call. Margaret,
Yes, that's fine.
John,
Yes. Yes.
Stephen,
Yes,
Kevin,
Yes.
Lori, yes. The motion carries unanimously to continue this to April 27th, 2020.
So just
With
for the record, the DPW did provide comments to the engineer within the last couple of days. So the engineer is responding to comments. They did not have time to turn it around, which is why we're continuing to go with the 27th, just so everybody knows. But they do have DPW comments.
Is this something that we can possibly get continued again to May 11th? Or do you think we can do this by,
Well, right now we have it on, we had it scheduled for the 27th, so I didn't want to put it out
Yeah.
there to the 11th at this point. It might need to go that way anyway, just based on the comments that are received and how the responses go. That I don't know
Okay.
exactly what's going to happen with regard to it.
Okay. Okay, number 3 on the agenda is an endorsement of approval not required. Mark A. Rodrick, Potomska Road, map 24, lot 87. Christine?
So this item, the applicant's engineer has requested that it be withdrawn at this time. The applicant is looking at also having the property removed from 61, chapter 61. So there are some issues with regard to how this one's going to proceed. So for now, we're going to withdraw without prejudice. Without
I
prejudice.
need a motion. I need a motion to withdraw without prejudice.
So moved.
Second.
Kevin Mello moved and John Souza seconded. All in favor, Margaret?
Aye, yes.
John Souza, yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Lori, yes. Motion carries unanimously. Number 4 is an endorsement of approval not required. Meeting Street, Massachusetts, Inc., MMS Realty, Inc., map 158, lot 54 and 54-1. Christine?
The proposed A&R plan meets all of the guidance for A&R subdivision plans. Therefore, there is no reason why this application is not eligible for endorsement. Proposed lot 1A will contain existing dwelling and barn and will be in a little bit over 80,000 square feet, while lot 2 will be 180,000, almost 188,000 square feet. There is a non-buildable parcel identified as parcel A, Posner Place, which is a private drive that will continue to be in existence. This is within the single residence B district. The proposed subdivision meets the criteria outlined in section 1.102 of the subdivision regulations, which requires that conveyances changing the size and shapes of lots provided that every lot so changed or affected by such change has frontage as required by the zoning bylaw or maintains existing non-conforming frontage. So again, this meets the requirements. I see no reason why you cannot endorse this proposal.
Anything from the board?
Motion to approve.
Everyone,
I second
John
that motion.
Souza motioned it. Margaret Sweet seconded. All in favor, Margaret?
Yes, aye.
John?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Lori, yes. Motion carries unanimously to approve the endorsement plan of Meeting Street, Massachusetts, Inc. Number 5. Am I missing one? Number 5.
That's right.
Okay. This is something that I will continue to chair the meeting, but I will not be talking about this or making any motions on it. And is town council on?
Town council
We got town-
I am
on,
here.
Brian.
I'm here.
You hear, Brian?
I am. I couldn't find the unmute button. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
I also see someone by the name of Ronnie's iPad. I am assuming that's Mr. Ron Oliveira, the project developer. Is that
Mr.
correct?
Olivera, are you on?
Yep, that's me.
Okay, all right. And then we have
Listen
Steve
to me.
Gioso, who will start the presentation.
Okay, good evening. Steve Giosa here, and this request is to have the board consider whether or not a bond needs to be posted for a private driveway being constructed to serve 2 single-family house lots. To refresh the board's memory, the Oliveira Sisters subdivision is a subdivision that was approved as an OSRD back at the end of 2018. And It was approved with a number of waivers. It created 2 additional house lots and maintained an existing house on the frontage on Russell's Mills Road. This is located on Russell's Mills Road across from Paid-Niram Acres. And the 5 waivers that were granted by the board under this had to do specifically with the creation of a roadway, or in this case, the lack of creation of a roadway. So in this case, it was a OSRD created with a private driveway being created to serve the subject lots. And there were 5 waivers granted. The first waiver was a waiver from the requirement to construct any subdivision roadways, and that was approved. The second waiver was to waive the requirement to establish an account to review a subdivision roadway, and since there were no roads being proposed for this project, that waiver was also granted. The third waiver was for the requirement to submit a maintenance documents, and since there was no subdivision roadway being created again, the waiver was granted by the board. The fourth waiver was again related to the roadway, and it was a requirement, a waiver from the requirement for construction covenants, which I think is really the item we're talking about tonight, for subdivision roadways, since no roadways were being proposed for this project. And then finally, we were granted a waiver from submitting roadway plans, again, where we were only creating a driveway to access the lots that a subdivision roadway plan and profile, which is typically required, was not mandated in this case. When the subdivision was approved, there were no performance covenants included in the approval, so there was no performance covenant granted. And typically you would post a bond, and in this case, the DPW has asked us to post a bond for the construction of the driveway. But in this case, it is a driveway and not a roadway, and we don't believe the DPW has jurisdiction over the construction of a common driveway. And I would point as an example to Collins Corner Estates. The board approved Collins Corner Estates back in 2014, 2015. That was a 2-lot subdivision located on a gravel way, very similar to Olivera Sisters subdivision. It had a paved apron on Collins Corner Road. The DPW had jurisdiction and inspected the construction of all of the work within the public way. So the paved apron was inspected by Public Works and signed off on. And that Public Works had no inspections or jurisdiction over the common driveway that provided access to the 2 lots within that development. Development was built, the lots were constructed, no bond was required, and the applicant was able to construct on those lots. What we're looking in this case is we believe that the DPW does have jurisdiction over the paved apron, or at least that portion of the paved apron that exists within the Russell's Mills Road right-of-way. They obviously have jurisdiction over the utility extensions into the project, the sewer and water services for the 2 houses that are being constructed. But that jurisdiction is the same as any other water service being brought to a single-family home being built in the town. The construction has to meet town standards. There will be inspectors out there inspecting that installation. The contractor doing the work would have to be bonded with the town to install those types of utilities. So you have that protection for the work within the right-of-way and on the utility systems. We don't believe that that carries over to construction of a driveway that's going to serve these particular houses. And I think that the planning board's approval pretty much eliminates that requirement for DPW oversight for that driveway. So we're looking for some direction. We think that it's overly burdensome on the applicant to be required to post a bond. I think they calculated a bond close to $200,000, I believe, for the common driveway. And again, we don't believe that that really should fall under the planning board or the DPW's jurisdiction regarding that oversight. And then at the end, we are required to make certain improvements. The gravel drive has to be a certain width. We have to plant street trees. Those are all part of the approval process as in any other subdivision, but we don't think it rises to the level of a bond requirement. And again, we're looking for some direction this evening.
Brian, do you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. I guess I'll start, I'll back up a little and say that whether or not the decision specifically mentions a performance covenant, it is a statutory obligation. And now the statute only talks about roadways and municipal services in terms of a performance covenant. But the board's regulations, its subdivision regulations, actually talk about a performance covenant for common driveways as well. And that wasn't a waiver that was requested. So on the four corners of the decision, the only waiver that was requested was a performance covenant for the construction of the roadway, because there is none. No waiver was requested for a performance covenant for the common driveway. So regardless of whether or not it was specifically stated in the decision, it is a requirement of the regulations that was not waived that a performance covenant be provided for the common driveway construction. If the applicant wants to seek an amendment to that effect to get a waiver for that, that's their prerogative and the board can look at it. But as of this point, and it's right in 4.3 of the subdivision regulations, it says that common driveways need a performance covenant. I don't really see a way around that, given that it wasn't specifically waived as part of the decision.
Okay, if I may, this is Steve again. The subdivision was approved and there were no requirements for a covenant, period. I mean, the subdivision was recorded at the Registry of Deeds. The decisions both for the special permit and the subdivision approval were recorded. And typically when there is a requirement for a covenant, that covenant is prepared at the time prior to endorsement. It's reviewed by the planning board. It is recorded with all the other documents, so the applicant knows their obligation, the board knows their obligation, and that becomes part of the official recorded record. That was not required in this case. So,
again, except for the fact that the decision says, because it's standard, except as provided below, the definitive OSRD plan shall conform in all respects with the applicable subdivision regulations of the planning board. That includes a performance covenant for the common driveway, which was not specifically waived. So whether it should have been done at the time or not, it's a requirement of the subdivision regulations that was not specifically asked for a waiver, nor was a waiver provided. So again, if it was something that was intended as being waived, there's a way to do that, which is simply apply for it. But as of right now, DPW is looking at this and saying there's a common driveway. The regulations of the planning board say we need a performance covenant for that, and we want one. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's something that's from a policy perspective needed. That's the planning board's call, but it is a provision of the subdivision regulations that no waiver was granted. So whether it was specifically discussed as a need or not is not really relevant. It's in the regulations. And so from that perspective, I think DPW is correct that it's a regulatory requirement. The decision says the regulations apply except for as specifically waived below, and there was nothing about a common driveway performance covenant requested or granted as a waiver. It's not really, whether it's standard practice or not, or whether or not how the performance covenant should have gone about being done and recorded wasn't followed or not is not really the relevancy of the issue. Like, common practice and what the regs provide are not necessarily the same thing. The regs, DPW is correct. The regs require a performance covenant in this case. If the board wants to, let them do an amendment to get around that, that's one thing, but DPW is correct at the moment. It's not really, the regs are clear. Common driveway requires a performance covenant. There's no really gray area there.
okay, I just, in the past, and I'm just going by past practice of this particular board, that has never been required in the past of these types of subdivisions. So I understand, maybe there is a requirement, it is not been enforced or it has not been applied. for these smaller developments where it truly is a driveway, where there are restrictions on the driveway not being conveyed as a public way somewhere down the line. It seems to me that the practice of the board has always been to handle these in this fashion. You know, if we have to request a waiver, I guess my question to the board members would be, is that something the board would entertain in this case, understanding the limited nature of the project, the fact that it wasn't explicitly required in the approval, and that all the roadway waivers were granted at the time because we weren't creating any roadways. Understanding we were creating a common drive.
The only thing that I would like to remind everybody is this is prior to my starting here. So this was the end of 2018. So you're, I'm not sure if the chair at the time was John Souza or if it was Joel Oliver, Alvet, I can't say the name. Anyway, so we have that, and then we have a number of new board members. So as we proceed with this going forward, remember we have 2 new board members with regard to this, so they didn't sit on the original application either. So just keep all of those things in mind, people, as we move forward.
Christine, may I make a comment? Lorianne, may I say
Go
something?
right, go right ahead, Steve.
I'm one of the new board members who has no background on this, but I think Steve Joseph's comments make some reasonable sense. And at the same time, I don't think the town should relax the rules 1 iota. So speaking for myself as one member, I would suggest that you apply for a waiver, which some of us might look favorably upon, but that we don't change the rules that Brian has outlined, because we need every rule we can get to keep other things that might be worse from happening. But I think I'd welcome a waiver request if you brought it.
I have a question also. Are you done, Steve?
Yes. Oh.
Yes,
have a-
I'm done. I'm done.
Okay. I have to say Steve Yoser or Steve Taylor. I have a question on the roadway. Because as you know, what happens, who is going to maintain this driveway? Is this going to be in the deeds that it has to be equally shared and maintained, as you well know, banks want today? Because what happens sometimes, as you know, Steve, that the ruts and everything, and one neighbor says, I'm not paying for it, and the other neighbor says, you pay for it. And so what did we do, since I didn't sit on this? What did we do about maintenance of the driveway?
So within the OSRD approval, there is a covenant that has been recorded, that is the OSRD covenant, and a homeowners association. So the homeowners association would take on the responsibility of the long-term maintenance of the roadway. So there are mechanisms in place for funding of that and for that long-term maintenance, and people buying into this project, you know, acknowledge that that becomes part of their deed, and they're bound by that requirement. And it's actually binds, I believe, all 3 owners, although it may just bind the 2 lots in the back, because the front lot, their access is through an existing driveway, and it's going to serve onto an existing paved apron. They're never going to go on the gravel because everything they have is already paved, and it'll tie into the paved apron we're creating. So I believe the covenant, the homeowners association requirements for maintenance only applies to the 2 back lots, the 2 new houses that will be created. And the people who buy those, it would show up in their deed or in their title that they are obligated to be part of the association and pay for the maintenance.
Has there been any mention of the amount of money put aside for this?
That I don't know. I couldn't answer that.
Okay, because I'm just curious to make sure that we don't have 2 house lots back there and then the road goes to, you know what?
Well, again, the homeowners are going to be responsible for the maintenance, the plowing, the upkeep of the road, and it's in their interest to keep that maintained in a way that's passable for their purposes. So again, it's a self-interest in that case.
And just to be clear, because it's not technically a roadway, it can never be petitioned to town meeting to be accepted. The town's never going to potentially have responsibility for this. So really, it's about ensuring it gets done right originally, because the town not only is not going to potentially have any responsibility, it's not really going to have much of a way to, other than the individual homeowners doing suits against each other and or doing a zoning enforcement action. There's not going to be really any other way to ensure maintenance of this driveway. So that's part of DPW's concern, making sure it gets done right the first time, rather than 2 or 3 years from now, we're back in the situation where it's rutted or
Right.
people can't get access to their houses.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, I'll weigh in on this. Certainly am somewhat sympathetic to your dilemma here. But after hearing from town council, I have to agree with him. And I don't have the luxury of DPW thoughts, why they're requiring this. I'd like to hear their side of the argument. I mean, you've made your case, Steve. I'd like to hear DPW make their case. But from a planning board perspective, I'm a little bit leery of granting a waiver on this, because even though under OSRD you can waive the street requirements, I mean, essentially this is a 3-lot subdivision with a road in it. I mean, if I were naive to our regulations and picked up this plan, I would think, oh, this is a road with a hammerhead at the end of it, with a designated right of way, even though it's only called an easement. So for all intents and purposes, it is a road. Technically, we call it a driveway. But what concerns me about this issue and it not being bonded, that even though it's a driveway, the DPW has put together these standards. If for some reason it doesn't get built, someone buys into this thinking the road's going to get, the driveway's going to get completed with the street trees and the gravel and all the items. There's got to be 25 items on this on the surety estimate that the DPW has given it us. So if I'm buying into this and these things don't get done, what do those people do? They come to the planning board and say, hey, folks, you approved this. Can you help me out? My developer or my neighbor doesn't want to put the trees in, doesn't want to put in the stop sign, and so forth. And then we end up in the middle of it. And we can't go back. If the developer's walked away and we don't have a bond hearing, we can't go back and insist that he do it. So I don't want to be caught in that situation. So my thought is to agree with Brian that we hold to our standard, and that if you were to apply for a waiver, I'm not so sure you'd get my vote unless you could bring DPW on board.
So the DPW did send an email, and I believe that was part of your package. There was an email from Tim Barber dated March 17th. So we have the surety, and then again, his response to Steve Gioso. I'll just read it for all of you. You are correct that the project was approved by the planning board as an OSRD, creating 2 additional lots which have a common driveway and utility access, and the existing lots does have frontage and access off of Russell's Mills Road, although the 2 additional lots were created without frontage. We have discussed the design, construction, and inspection criteria of OSRD subdivisions with planning. I believe that we are in agreement with planning that the letter will be requested from DPW stating that the construction has been completed per the approved design plan, including the common driveway and utilities, in order to be consistent with the requirements of the planning board and to confirm that the construction is completed per the approved plan, as well as the materials being used. We shall inspect the full construction of the subdivision unless instructed otherwise. See the attached flow charts, B5 and B6 of the subdivision regulations. So that was Tim Barber, again, from DPW, his response directly to Steve Gioso on March 17th. And that was in addition to the surety estimate, which was $194,000 and change.
And then Christine, I saw a comment from you. Building permits cannot be issued until the water and sewer cards are released, and they can't be released without a bond.
So that had
So hypothetically, if the planning board, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that had to do with the building commissioner's
Yep.
comments. And what he has said now is that construction, there was initially a construction permit for foundations. Then construction continued onto the house portions of the property. So ultimately, permits were issued for construction of the structures. At this point, until this issue is resolved amongst everyone here, the occupancy permits will become an issue if things go forward, or depending on how things go forward. That's the potential issue from what the building inspector can say.
Yeah, so I'm not so sure who has the final say. Let's say hypothetically, Steve and his client do apply for a waiver. And let's say they get 3 members of the board to agree with a waiver, but the DPW is still holding that they want a bond. Will the builder permit, would an occupancy be released if a bond hasn't been set up? Who holds the card in that case? I'm not so
Right,
sure.
yeah.
Well,
I
sorry,
think
go ahead.
that's
Go
up
ahead.
to-
Brian?
that comes up to Brian.
Yeah, I mean, DPW's position is in part predicated upon they're looking at the subdivision regulations and seeing what seems to be required at the moment.
Okay.
So I think that's part of it.
So if the board waived it, then the DPW would say, okay, we can't play that card anymore.
I'm not going to say for certain, but my understanding at this point is a lot of this is about they don't see anything in the planning board that says this doesn't apply currently.
Correct. Okay,
I
understood.
will also say this is also about release of lots. Like they could go ahead and build the common driveway right now without a bond if they wanted to, and then they could get their lots released. They want to be able to get lot release before that, I'm assuming. So it's part of it's about order as well. Like I talked to Tim Barber, they don't care about a bond if it's all built ahead of time. So that's part of it as well. As a separate matter, I don't know if they would be okay with that, but DPW wouldn't mind not having a bond at this point if they just went ahead and built the driveway and the utilities before any other permits were pulled or houses were built or anything continued or anything like that. So part of it is about order for them, about ensuring that it's all done before someone might accidentally occupy the house.
Yeah, no, and to the other board members, Laurie and Kevin, what was it, Carrollton? The road right next to Town Hall, what was that?
Clarendon, right. I was about to address that.
I don't want to end
you're
up
done.
with another nightmare like that where people are buying into it and things aren't complete, and so that's
John, if you're done,
yep.
There's no doubt in my mind that we would have granted this waiver back in 2018 because this road driveway servicing 2 properties. You know, I'm not concerned with 20 years down the road because it's the 2 people. If they want to live there with potholes in their driveway and they can't get together to pave it, that's up to them. This will never be a public road. As far as having it become Clarendon, I would not be in favor of releasing any occupancy permit. And that's where we hold the power, is to make sure that the trees are planted, to make sure the tie-ins are done properly. I think this is a technicality that we overlooked, or that we've overlooked in the last several years that the DPW just started picking up on. So
Yeah, so,
I don't
so
want to
that-
go against them, but
Right.
at the same time, I would be in favor of granting this waiver because we would have, I do believe as a board, when this came before us, obviously we've granted all the other waivers, we would have said, yeah, this doesn't make sense to hold $200,000 for 2 lots. The value of these lots are probably $150,000 each. So we're asking for $200,000 to hold for these 2 lots. That just doesn't seem reasonable to me.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
what I'm concerned with, Kevin, is that I think it could be another Clarendon Street because you're right. I'm not. It's a private road. 20 years down the road, if there's an argument over who fills in the pothole, I'm not concerned about that.
Correct.
What I'm concerned about is that they're looking to release the lots. So someone's buying into this. The road's not done. So they bought into it thinking, I'm going to buy into this and have a complete driveway when I'm done. The developer walks for whatever reason, and it doesn't get done. So now they come back to the town and say, hey, I'm stuck here. I've been here for 3 years from now, and I don't have any street trees. I don't have the gravel down. and then, you know, we look like the bad guys again. That's my concern.
John, I think the reason I disagree with that is we went soft on Clarendon and we allowed a temporary occupancy permit on that. And that's where we went soft on Clarendon Street. And I don't want to generalize, but as long as I'm on this board, I would never grant another temporary occupancy permit for such a condition because I learned my lesson from that one. So as far as building the houses, getting them ready to sell, as long as the developer is aware that we are not going to allow occupancy permit, and as long as we have the building commissioner understanding that no occupancy permit can be done until the conditions are met, I think we're safe.
I would agree with you, Kevin. I don't know if we got those insurance on those. That's what I'd be concerned about, you know, because if there's no bond and there's no inspection by the DPW, then how would the building commissioner know whether to release an occupancy permit or not? No one's doing inspections because the DPW, it's a private driveway. So that's, and without the DPW, Tim Barber and I don't have the answers to that, Kevin. So I would agree with you there. If we had some assurances that there were inspections and the DPW was involved, but I think if we grant a waiver, then I believe the DPW washes their hand of the entire situation. Other than
no, they still have to do the apron. They still have to do the utilities. They still have to do the water, the sewer. That is still
gravel and the everything else. I'm not sure. I think everything else they don't care anymore. But
is it possible to chime in, please?
Yes, please.
This is Ron Olivera, the developer. How you doing this evening? This all came about because Mr. Barber would not issue the water and sewer cards without the bond. So I came to a halt at the construction. So he wouldn't issue the water and sewer cards without the bond. At the end of the day, when I go for my occupancy permit, Mr. Barber has to sign my occupancy in order for me to get it. So there's no going around the DPW. Not that anyone's even trying to go around the DPW, but we came to a halt with the water and sewer cards because he was asking for the bond first. We're not trying to sell the house off right now. We're still working on the road. We're still working on the house. We're not trying to get any lots released. We were just trying to continue the construction process. That's how this all came about.
So if I can chime in for a second, I can tell you a lot of this is about DPW wanting to have some guidance from the planning board. Is this supposed to be something, these common driveways with no other frontage in the subdivision, is this something they're supposed to be worrying about? Is it not supposed to be something they're worried about? Because they're looking at the subdivision regulations now and going, they think they need to be involved in this. So if that's something that is not what the board is intending, there can be waivers you're granting, or there can be a revision to the subdivision regulations. But they don't like being in the spot, at least, and I could be misrepresenting, but my strong understanding is they don't like being in the spot where they're sort of having to deal with an ambiguity rather than being given direction about an ambiguity. So when there's ambiguity, they're erring on the side of being conservative and cautious and saying, well, we always require this bond. It seems like in this case, you still need one. We don't see any specific waiver from it. We're going to require it. And as long as it feels like they have to be involved from an inspection perspective, they want to do it fully by the book. But if there's a situation where they're being told they don't have to be involved, I don't think they're going to be concerned. So that's part of what I think is happening.
He should be able to give me my water and sewer cards, let me continue the construction, and then when I go to get a lot released, if the road isn't done, then request a bond if I'm looking to sell off a lot to a buyer. That's not what we're asking for. We were just asking to be able to continue construction. And if the message is we got to put up a $200,000 bond for 2 lots, there's going to be a lot of developers running to the hills. But that's all that we were asking, was to continue construction. And he would not give us the water and sewer cards till this was established. And we weren't asking for lots to be released. We were just simply asking for construction to continue. And at the end of the day, he has to sign an occupancy permit for me to be able to sell it to somebody. So we're not trying to get around Mr. Barber. We're just trying to get the water and sewer card costs so we can continue with construction. That's how this all came about. And he didn't want to issue the water and sewer cards till the bond was posted, which We're not trying to release the lots, we're just trying to continue with work.
All right, so I'm sympathetic to your cause, and I think I could look at if a waiver was applied, I think I could certainly entertain that. But to my fellow board members, I think a future meeting with Mr. Barber to go over his concerns and air this out and make sure we're all on the same page and what his preference would be going forward. Unrelated to this subdivision, but I think we should have, just on this subject alone, a meeting with him.
I can agree with that, John. Absolutely. And it's, if nothing else, we should be aware of it and more cognizant of it for future private ways. So, Steve, is that possible to put together a request for a waiver for us for our next meeting?
Yeah, I think the waiver request that Attorney Cruz was talking about was a waiver of the performance covenant requirement. And I think what Tim Barber is asking for is the bond being in place before they would allow the water and sewer cards to be released, even if we're not asking for the lots to be released. So it seems to me that on any subdivision, the subdivision being constructed on Tucker Road, they posted a bond because they wanted to start selling lots right away. But if they didn't want to sell lots right away, they could have started construction, had DPW inspect all the installation, not posted a bond until they got to a particular phase of construction, then post the bond for whatever remaining work that DPW indicates needs to be completed. So I think what Ron's asking for is he'd like to be able to continue his construction. If the DPW has to inspect, they have to inspect, fine. We just don't want to have to post a bond because we're not asking for the lots to be released for sale. I mean, the bond is to protect the future homeowner, not the developer. The developer is putting the road in at his expense, and then the bond is there to protect the future owners to make sure that the road does get completed, or in this case, the driveway gets completed. So maybe some direction to DPW that we don't need a bond as long as we're not asking for lot releases. And then I can review with Ron, the applicant, about requesting maybe a specific waiver of the performance covenant. If I think that's what I understood Attorney Cruz saying we would need to do. And then I would guess that's requested under the subdivision regulations, which requires 3 out of 5 votes. And it sounds like we already have one member who is not eligible to vote in this matter, where Laurie is not participating.
So
Brian,
Steve, I agree with everything you just said, and I'm on board with granting a waiver if your intention is not to sell a lot before the road's complete.
Okay.
And if we can get some assurance of that, and the DPW's on board with that, and that's how we move forward on these things, and I could buy into that.
Yeah,
Kevin,
if I get to the tail end and these homeowners want to move in and I've got the road done, water and sewer in, and I just haven't put in the trees, if I got to put up $10,000, that's different than $200,000. And I would be amicable to whatever Mr. Barber came up with at that time, because we're going to have the water and sewer into the house and all those things. The house will be done and the road will be gravelled. And if we just haven't time to plant trees and these people are in a hurry because, you know, financing's changing, everything's changing in our real estate environment. And maybe they're at risk of losing their job. They don't want to lose the house. If we have to close sooner than later, Mr. Barber requested some money for the trees, land, whatever it is, I'd be amicable to something like that. You know, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 is different than $200,000 at this point. You know, that's all I'm asking them to just be fair and, you know, and let us continue the process until we are ready to release it, and then he can make a determination at that point. I would appreciate it if that was possible.
Okay.
May I make a comment? Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would just say that I'm still favorable to considering a waiver. I want to make sure that the town does not relax our fundamental requirements up front. When we get into a situation that's halfway down the road or into the 7th inning of a development that's under construction, I totally concur with Mr. Barber's concerns, and we can look favorably on a waiver. We should keep, however, our strict rules in place so that we discourage things in the first place. And I would welcome a meeting, and I would like for Mr. Giosa to be part of that meeting whenever the time comes. He's made a lot of good points tonight, but I think this is a reasonable case, but I don't think we should weaken the town regulations at all.
So Brian, is this acceptable for what they're all proposing here?
So there was, I want to make sure I got it all because there was a lot of back and forth. Whether or not you guys want to accept an amendment to the subdivision approval to grant another waiver and then grant it, that's your guys' call. I mean, that takes care of the subdivision regulation requirement that there be performance surety of some type for the common driveway. Beyond that, the issue of Tim Barber's requirements of when things had to be done, he was going based off the flow charts in the subdivision regulations. He wasn't making up the process. So to the extent that there's an issue with that process, it may be something you want to review in the flow charts, because that's what he's going off of. Beyond that, I don't really want to speak for him in terms of whether or not, from a practical perspective, those ideas work for him. I can just tell you from a legal perspective, there is a requirement that common driveways have a covenant, bond posted, and that you guys can grant a waiver from it if you want to. That's your call.
So can we just make a motion and take a vote right now for
They
that
got
waiver?
to submit an application.
Yeah,
Okay.
they have to, yeah, I don't have any record of it.
It will be a public hearing. They have to submit it, just like you would do any other amendment to subdivision approval.
And we have no right to ask Tim to just let him continue on with the buildings, the building of the road, the building of the houses.
I mean, I can say, I can't tell you what he would say in response to that. That's
mean,
between you guys.
I don't want to get into a pissing match with the DPW, and we value his opinion, and we're happy he's looking out for us. But at the same time, I do feel that this was a loophole that we overlooked back in 2018.
Yeah, I can't tell Tim what to do or not to do. You know, I'm not in that position to do that, and I don't feel comfortable representing what he would respond to in terms of you saying something to him. I think if you want to discuss that, you should have him in for a meeting. I think that's the easiest thing to do. And I think that was suggested. I do know that I feel like there is a desire to have guidance from planning board on what it wants in these situations rather than DPW trying to figure it out. So if a meeting resolves that, that might be a way to go. But I feel like I've already spoken a lot on DPW's behalf, and I don't want to do it anymore. I think it's something that there should be a discussion directly.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? Can't hear you, Lori.
She's muted right now.
Okay, I got it. I don't know what this, I'm on my phone, so I'm not sure what it's doing. Go ahead,
Okay.
Mo.
I have a question. Kevin, I understand your feelings, but why couldn't we just postpone this for 2 weeks so we get a waiver written up and get it a little bit more so the rest of us,
Right, it sounds like that's what we have to do.
Well, I think that's what,
We
I
don't
think
have an
that's-
application for a waiver.
right.
So-
But I think that we should do, okay?
Right, well,
Okay.
I mean, time is of the essence. I'd like to get this resolved as quickly as possible. I don't think we're gonna have a meeting with the DPW within 2 weeks either. So it really goes back to Steve and, and Ron. Do they want to just put in for the waiver, or do you want us to set up a meeting and try to resolve this with the DPW through a meeting?
Well, why couldn't we just request a waiver at a future meeting? And at that future meeting, if it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks, have asked Mr. Barber to come at the same time.
Christine, a
agree.
procedural question with Christine. This
Yeah.
has to be through a public hearing, so it has to be advertised?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
So
The waiver has to be, the waiver request, do we have like a standard form that we're going to use, Brian, or are they just going to write up a request for a
It
waiver?
would just be a application to amend. I assume we have an application to amend the subdivision approval. That's what it is.
Okay.
Would you disagree, Steve? I mean, that's all it is.
Yeah, I would say that's what it is. I guess I'm still back at the question though of if we're not looking for lot releases, do we really need a bond? I know we need DPW inspections and their oversight and their sign off on the construction. But if the applicant is not looking to physically change title to the property, does the applicant need to have a bond in place? That's really, I think, the fundamental question, because if we don't need a bond, we don't have to ask for the waiver because Ron is willing to wait till the end and post a bond for any remaining cleanup items at the end. He's just right now stopped from doing any further work because he can't get the sewer and water cards, which allows him to continue the construction. So it seems to me that if we're all in agreement that DPW has jurisdiction over reviewing the construction and what they're doing, and they're going to provide that oversight, then, and Ron is not looking to sell the lots at the moment or request from the planning board a release of the lots, then why wouldn't he be allowed to get those sewer and water cards just by getting some direction from the planning board saying that the board does not object to that occurring as long as an occupancy permit is not granted to the applicant, prior to a bond being posted for any remaining work?
What needs to happen or not happen before the bond is posted, that is, I'll say I'll leave that to DPW and the planning board. So that's that is a practical issue more than a legal issue, I think. So if that means bringing in Tim Barber to talk about it, I think that might be the way to go.
Steve, I agree with your scenario. I have no problem with the way you want to do it. And if we could maybe this evening take a simple vote that and I send a message to Tim Barber that the planning board under no circumstances will release the lots on this subdivision without a bond or the road completed. So I
that
think
makes sense.
Right. that would may give some assurance to Tim Barber at the moment, and then going forward, I think outside this issue, I think we still need to have a meeting with Tim Barber. It doesn't have to be before this issue is resolved, but after. I think the planning board should meet with Tim Barber to go over scenarios like this and where he is most comfortable in going forward.
And
I would agree with that.
And on the applicant side, I would agree with that as well.
I would agree with that for this particular instance, but I do think we should have the continuing meetings, but I would agree for this instance as well.
So Christine, can you draft a letter to Tim stating that and get that off to him?
So if that's acceptable with Brian, right, we can proceed this way if this is what the
I mean,
decide.
yeah, this is about essentially what the planning board feels can be completed before the bond is posted. So that is, if you think that the utility parts of the common driveway can be done before the bond, and then the remaining, graveling and grading of it is done after the bond, that is, I feel, ultimately an issue of you clarifying your decision to DPW. And I think a lot of what DPW wants is clarity. So I think in the future, it would be better if these issues were done explicitly in the decision. And having formal waivers or discussions about all of this, so that because especially in these, and it seems like this is happening repeatedly, where you have decided to fully waive frontage as part of OSRD. So you're creating these weird scenarios where the common driveways are really it, and DPW needs to know what to do in these situations. So whether that is revising the regulations to account for those scenarios specifically, or where it is ensuring that you have very specific conditions and waivers that you standardize each time to account for them. But DPW is definitely unclear what to do in these situations. And so, like I said, I think they're erring on the side of caution and consistency with how they do it with every other type of subdivision, rather than going out on a limb and doing things differently when they have no direction from the board.
Yep. So that's why I think a meeting is important, and I certainly appreciate Tim Barber's attention to this issue. I'm glad he's bringing it up and pointing it out, and he's looking after the best interests of the town. So I
Okay.
appreciate his efforts.
So I guess if Lori wants to take the vote, the roll call, even though she will not be voting in this particular case, then I will draft a letter and,
John, can you,
So, Yeah, I
Make a
make a
motion
motion that we
and-
send a letter to Tim Barber assuring him that the planning board feels there's not a need for a bond at this time. The developer has told us that no lots he doesn't intend to ask for a lot release, and the planning board will not entertain a lot release unless a bond is posted.
and then do you want the building commissioner copied on this so that there are no
Yeah,
occupants?
right, so he's, yep,
Okay.
yep. And
I second that.
and no occupancy permits to be released by the building commissioner until the planning board and the DPW is signed off.
I have a motion on the floor made by John Souza, seconded by Kevin Mello. Roll call vote. Margaret Sweet,
All right.
John,
Yes,
Stephen,
Yes, I concur. I'd request an opportunity to make a comment to my colleagues after the vote is concluded, but I concur.
Kevin,
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes. Can you hear me?
A motion carries 4 in favor and 1 recuse.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
You're welcome, Steve.
yeah,
Thank you.
good night, guys.
Good night.
And may I just make my comment and notice that I have a smile on my face, even if you can't see it on the TV. Somewhere in the midst of this discussion, somebody said that developers would be running for the hills if we made this process too cumbersome on common driveways. And I just want to point out that that would be a good thing, not a bad thing. But in this case, once we've already approved it, we ought to treat the person fairly, and so I'm in favor of the waiver. But we don't want to make it easy to build common driveways. That's a bad thing for the town financially and something we should talk about in our future planning.
Okay, I have asked several times to have a meeting with DPW because I know they have several issues. So hopefully this will get them to to us so that we'll have a meeting with them after we get to have meetings. Okay, number 6, Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Officer for Energy and Environmental Affairs, MEPA office. Christine, what do we need to do with this? Do we need to vote on this, or do we need to just make comments if we feel they're important?
So this basically is just a change. I have not seen one of these come before us before. It's just a notice of project change. And basically what it is the project change involves an increase in construction matting in wetlands to facilitate the removal of approximately 103 hazard and endangered trees adjacent to a cleared right-of-way that endanger the safe operation of the proposed project. Many of those trees have experienced rapid decline in health due to the gypsy moth, winter moth damage, and drought conditions. In addition, a minor design change will eliminate proposed structure 88 and relocate structure 87 further from the wetlands. So pretty much it's got to do with Eversource and some of the utility work that they are doing. I don't know if you want me to give comment. Again, they're very minor changes in this particular case.
Christine, if I could just ask, you guys don't need me anymore, right?
Nope, we're
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
thank you, Brian.
Good night,
Thank you,
Brian.
Brian.
Good night, Brian.
I'll
Yeah,
make a
Christine,
motion
I
to
can
acknowledge and file the MEPA report. There's no reason to respond to that.
Right.
Yes, because I've never seen one come before us before either.
I second that motion. It's a perfectly reasonable request for construction matting so they don't lose a machine in the swamp.
Okay, the motion's been, the motion's been made to file and acknowledge by John Souza, seconded by Stephen Taylor. Margaret Sweet,
Yes.
John,
Yes,
Stephen,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Lori Miller, motion carries unanimously. Okay, next on the agenda is, I'm trying to get to it.
Oh, it's just the chairman's report and the planner's report. So I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say.
Christine, and I'd asked you earlier, could you just tell them that there's a public meeting with the finance committee?
Oh, yeah.
What day?
Right. So we have the next scheduled meeting for the planning board, and we do already have a sign-in ID for that, is Monday, April 13th, and that is for the public hearings for the town warrant articles. We are going with the floodplain, the aquifer. There is something from the select board with regard to a parcel, and then there's one citizen's petition. So that meeting will strictly focus on those things. Prior to it, we're going to have the select board join us at 6:30, because normally we have a meeting with them to go over items in advance of the public hearing. So we will be doing that. Then on Thursday, April 16th at 6:30, we're going to have a joint meeting with the finance committee, and that's typically where the planner, the chair, and then anybody else who's interested can participate. And since we're doing this all via Zoom, it's a good opportunity to kind of talk to. So it'll just be you and the select board primarily, the finance committee, to go over these warrant articles and to go over the budget. I have not proposed any changes to the planning department budget. It's the same as it's been the last couple of years. Last year we did have to move some money around within the budget. It depends on how many public hearings we have, how many notices we have to give, how many legal notices. But so basically we've kept it exactly the same, and then we just move within line items if we need to. Then we have the next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be April 27th, and that one will also be via Zoom. And as I had sent you earlier, we will be getting a password for that one, because that's not one we actually have an ID for yet. So we'll have an ID number, and then we'll have a password, and that's for protection of our information. As DCTV and as everybody else learns a little bit about this process, we're kind of just stepping up. We're trying to step up our game a little bit, for lack of a better term. And then the regularly scheduled meeting in May would be May 11th. And the way it stands right now, we should be back at Town Hall, barring any changes. And as far as I've been advised right now so far from Town Council, Anthony and Brian, we anticipate that the town meeting is going to go on June 2nd. It seems like most of the executive order now, many cities and towns have their town meetings a little bit earlier than Dartmouth does. So that's pretty much why ours hasn't changed yet. I think we'll be in good shape based on the items that we have. Obviously we're going to explain that the floodplain changes in the map, which I've been working on fine tuning. Mike O'Reilly helped me initially set it up, but I've been fine tuning some things with regard to that. So I will have that posted. It'll be in your packages in preparation, but I'll also make sure I access Zoom from the other machine so I can put it up for everybody to look at and talk to throughout. The floodplain one is because of FEMA requirements. The aquifer is because of DEP. And then that request came from, as you all know, that came from DPW. But again, that was required per the state, per the Department of Environmental Protection. The citizens petition has something that had come forward. That's for a change of the zoning of a particular lot, which abuts another district, as we had basically discussed in the past. And then we have the change to the general business district, which is being brought by the select board. So you, again, will be able to discuss their things with them prior to the actual public hearing. So that's the next couple of weeks. The other thing that, as all of this has evolved, I did send you all an email this morning, and basically that was the town had implemented a couple of weeks ago a continuary of operational plan, and basically that was at the direction of the select board and the town administrator. And that was just to make sure that we could keep all essential services going, so we could keep planning board meetings going, permits applied, DPW going, and all of those type of things. We were asked to kind of revise it a little bit over the weekend, so I did revise it, and part of what you saw today was basically a work plan for Jane and I, because while people are still not in town hall, we want to make sure that everybody is working in some capacity. There was some discussion about who was getting comp time or who was getting, it had to do a lot with the hourly people and not so much with department heads. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody was working. I knew that Jane had a number of outstanding meeting minutes as a result of, not having a planner and stuff like that. So I've recommended that she move forward with some of that stuff at this time. She can work from home. She had said right now she has a laptop that she can work from. I have also put in a request for a town one with an actual connection to the town network, similar to what I've been using right now. So basically it's just to make sure that everybody is working. So that's why you're all copied on that, just so you know what she's working on. Once she gets through that, and then the March minutes and a couple of things like that, then I will move her on to the updating the website. In writing the letter, it had come to my attention, Steve had pointed out, it had said the mission for the planning board, and there is some concern with regard to what the mission is. I, again, was just trying to prepare the work plan, so I didn't really focus on it. We had discussed the mission early on in the master plan work, changing your mission. Because the master plan is not completed yet or anything like that, I have not changed it on the town website. But obviously there is some concern, and this definitely proved that it does need to be updated, because basically it just talks about continually approving, all subdivisions, and, the wording does need to be changed, and we have discussed it. I told Steve that I'd pull it out at some point, the revised wording. I had given it to SERPED to use going forward. So we should be getting it in the documents, the draft documents. But that being said, under all of this, I did not think to include that in my work plan, but again, it's not approved. So, it was just discussed informally, but we are working on it. It does need to change. And this was a glaring example of that. The other thing is SERPED initially had our next public workshop scheduled for the end of the month. Obviously, we needed to cancel all of that. The woman that I deal with, Helen, that is our primary contact there, she had reached out to me about trying to do Zoom meetings and doing some public participation that way. And while I don't think that's a bad idea, I think right now I had suggested to her, and you can let me know if you feel differently, but that she start getting us some draft material instead. I'd rather focus on some of that for a while, and then maybe handle some of our more, some of the public hearing information when we can all meet in person, as opposed to trying to do that via Zoom. So we make sure we get, I mean, while we might get some good input, from the 100 people who could sign in, people are doing a lot of other things right now. And I would like to focus on some draft material, some text, and seeing some of that, so we know what directions we need to focus on, or where we need to kind of maybe get more public participation. Obviously things have changed drastically now, but so that's the guidance I've given her on that. The situation is obviously always changing. Every day is something a little bit different. I typically go in the office, just so you all know. I go in, a couple of times a week in the mornings. The building isn't open. Most of the staff does not, they can come and access at certain times, call somebody and have them open the door or something like that. I think, once we get going here, Jane and I, there hasn't been much need for a lot of things. Jane has been handling any emails that she's had on her phone, that type of thing, just keeping things moving. She did come in the end of last week and help me with the packages and stuff like that. But I think pretty much the two of us can work from our current, from our home situations fairly easily at this point. Hopefully it'll only be a couple more weeks. Every department is doing things a little bit differently. Some departments are kind of in, not really, so we'll kind of keep tweaking it. So don't think anything is like really stationary, but, you know, be aware that, you know, if you have issues or there's concerns or something that you're worried about, send an email, because then we can get back to you quickly and respond. Between the two of us, we've got everything covered. As far as applications are going, I've reached out to engineers, developers, as questions come in. You know, so right now I have them pretty much submitting things electronically, and then afterwards, I've met with Steve one time after the last meeting to get things signed. We've met at an outside location, you know, social distancing and all of that good stuff. So we're finding ways around it. It's just a little bit complicated process, but, you know, if anybody asks you if the planning board's moving forward doing things, we are accepting applications, we're moving, you know, it's just a slightly convoluted process right now.
Okay, I have a question. Kevin and John, did you realize that we have minutes of the meetings from 2018 that have not been approved?
No.
Yeah, that's what we have Jane working on. So we need to get her to finish that so we can get that approved. So I think the planning board just needs to pass that on to make sure that we can get that done as soon as possible.
Can we also put something in place to make sure that doesn't happen again? I mean, that's,
Well, I think it was because she was, you know, kind of filling in as the planner, I guess, while you were hiring or whatever. But your meeting minutes for the planning board go back well into the 50s. I mean, the planning board has done an excellent job. So I hate to see this little window, and I have been trying to encourage her working on this. So this is something that we're going to really push during this time to get this cleared away, because actually the state requires that those meeting minutes are posted much more, you know, frequently. So, you know, I would keep that in mind going forward. You know, when you don't see meeting minutes, like in the case of this one, when you don't see meeting minutes on an agenda, you know, kind of be really cognizant of that. Again, we're missing like March, you know, but again, this is kind of confusing, but so I did list out all of the minutes that were missing in that email that was sent to all of you today.
okay. I have a question about the upcoming meetings. In the last couple of town meetings, the finance board seems to be taking, you know, a greater role in what we're bringing forth to town meeting, whether it's within their right or not. I mean, we're not asking for financial, but they're asking a lot more questions. So I would like to see them involved with the April 13th meeting. If they're going to have questions that they're going to want to bring up, they should be part of the select board meeting, and they should be hands-on. None of it has to do
normally
with finance.
the way it's been set up in the past is you've reached out to them after, so that was on the town calendar that I was trying to follow. So
Correct. I mean, and normally in the past, they've been, you know, they listen to what we're saying and they just go along with it. But the last couple of, I don't know if it's a new agenda they have or a new regime that they have, but the current board as it sits for the finance committee, they seem to be taking a greater interest to the point where
that was why I made the suggestion that in the future we meet with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of the Finance Committee before we have public hearings, so that we can get them on board. But it just never seems to happen.
Well, and that's why I'm making the request that we purposely invite them to the April 13th so they can have a front row seat to the dog and pony show with the select board, if you would.
Yeah, so I can invite them, but what I will tell you about the select board meeting, the select board is only going to be there from 6:30 to 7. Then they're going off into their own meeting when you have your public hearing. So I will ask the finance committee to join us at 7 o'clock. Otherwise you won't get through, I don't think, all of your items with the select board, or do you disagree? Do you want them invited?
Well, no, I mean, one of the agenda items for town meeting is what the select board's meeting with us at 6:30 about. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's what, but I'm saying they're going off to their own meeting. Do you want to confuse it having another 9 people, or do you want to have one-on-one with the select board and then have finance committee during the regular public hearing that you hold instead.
I would like to send the invitation to the finance board to be in the audience for our select board meeting as well as our public hearing.
Okay.
If they choose not to take us up on that, we have no right to dictate that they're there. But if they choose not to take us up on that and be part of it or listen in on it, then how dare they criticize us later for anything that we bring to town meeting?
Right. Okay. I can invite them, and then again, we still have a meeting with them on the Thursday.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Christine, I support what Kevin is suggesting. I have a couple of comments, but before my comments, can I confirm that both the meeting on Monday, April 13th and the one on Thursday, the 16th are going to be by Zoom and they start at 6:30 p.m.?
They do. That
And
is
those are
correct.
both the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
The 13th is at 7,
No,
isn't it?
the 13th is going to be at 6:30 so that you can meet
Okay,
with the
6:30
select board.
with the select board, that's right.
I just wanted to make sure that's clear for all of us on the calendar.
6:30.
Okay,
Okay.
on the 13th at 6:30, do we have to go in and out of the meeting with different PIN numbers, or is it going to be all the same?
I have Peter working on that now. It's going to be
Okay.
it's going to be one PIN number.
One PIN
Okay.
number.
The meeting on the 16th will have a PIN number and it will have the password. That'll be the start of the password thing as well.
Okay,
So a comment, Christine, I appreciate your explaining that we do need to work on that mission statement for the planning board as part of the 10-year plan. And I would like to say even more strongly than you did, the A, that I agree with you, but B, that I think these Zoom meetings, at least for those of us on the planning board and so far several people from outside who have joined us, are working fine. And they seem to me to be an opportunity to discuss our priorities and to discuss what we really care about and to do planning for the town's future. And so I think we ought to make the most of that. And I welcome your idea that we spend some time discussing and hearing back, some actual language from Serped and making some progress. And we can have our next public meeting when it's appropriate and truly public. And on that latter subject, this is just a personal opinion. I have no special insight, but I would be shocked if we are able to have a multi-100-person town meeting on June 7th. I think there's no chance that the medical community is going to approve that, no matter how many politicians want it to go one way or the other. So
Right.
all I would say is that we as a planning board should be prepared to meet by Zoom and ought to keep doing so until we actually see several hundred people in a town meeting auditorium. At that point, we can go back to meeting in person, but I think that's a ways away, and I know there are people who hope it isn't, but I'd be very surprised. So we ought to this is working very well. I think this meeting has gone beautifully, and the more we do it, the better we get at it. So let's just take the opportunity to do some real planning and use this, and then we'll see when we actually get back to in person.
Right.
anything else to come before this board? Anybody else have any comments?
Motion to adjourn?
Second,
John Souza made a motion to adjourn, and who seconded?
I did, but I don't have to be the one.
That's all right, Steve Taylor seconded. Margaret,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes?
Kevin?
Yes.
And before I say yes, Christine, you will send us out before every meeting. Just remind us when it is and what our numbers are to get onto the meeting, okay?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank
Okay,
you all.
thank
Thank you.
Yes, and meeting's adjourned. It's 8:49.